Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful to see so many of you here. This is one of the pre-performance talks. I know some of you have been to many of them already, and there are many more to come. My name is Kate Mosse, and I'm a novelist, but also, in this case, I'm writing the book, the 50th anniversary book for Chichester Festival Theatre, which publishes on the 8th of June. This is going to be an hour-long event. I'm sure you've already turned your mobile phones off, but please do if you... Oh, yes. Oh, look at you all diving for your feet. Penny Keith and I are going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to take about 20 minutes of questions, because I know many of you, thank you, will have questions you want to do. And then at 6 o'clock, I will rush Miss Keith off, because, of course, she is appearing in the very, very wonderful Way of the World across the way. So I have promised not to gush too much, but this is an extraordinary experience for many of us who are Chichesterians and who have known Penelope Keith's relationship with CFT over so many years. And it is rather like interviewing royalty, in this case, CFT royalty. And of course you are both an OBE and now a CBE.
Yes.
But I want to start, although I'm going to ask you about your broader career in the very beginning of it, I do want to start in 1977 with the apple cart, the first time you were here at CFT. And of course, rather wonderfully, it was also a Jubilee year, of course. And that was relevant, wasn't it?
Well, it was relevant because, yes, it was the Silver Jubilee. And there were gala concerts, it seemed to me, weekly. And I was in a play in London called Donkey's Years. And also there was a television programme, The Good Life, on at the same time. So one's face was fairly current at the time. And with these galas, you kept being asked. I remember playing the National Theatre one Sunday, and 2 weeks later the Palladium, which was, you know, I thought quite a good span. And then I was working in London rather hard, and I'd been doing television during the day and theatre in the evening. And when I was asked to come down here to play in the apple cart, I thought, oh, how wonderful to be able to just concentrate on one job and be in the lovely countryside. And also it was a marvellous part to play. So when their gala was announced, would I come down and do a gala here? I thought, oh yes, how wonderful. So that's the first time wasn't the first time I'd seen anything at the theatre, but this was the first time I'd set foot on the stage for the gala, yes.
And you were playing opposite Kate Mosse.
In the apple cart,
yes. Apple cart.
Yes.
And so you had these two things going on. You had this wonderful part, Orinthia, and you were playing with Kate Mosse, who says very lovely things about playing with you. Sounded awful. Playing on the stage with you, obviously, that would be a terrible way of putting that. I hope Kate Mosse isn't here. No, he's obviously not. But also you were doing the gala, and when you were interviewed for the CFT book, it's a book that interviews all the artistic directors who are still available to be interviewed. And the current management, Jonathan Church and Alan Finch, decided on just a handful of actors who would somehow represent, if you like, the beating heart of CFT over 50 years. And of course, Penny Keith was one of them. And Patrick said of you, and I'm afraid this is the first one I'm going to read, he said, "From the start, I genuinely thought she was someone special, a very witty girl, and often just wonderfully funny." So there were the two things. You were playing in the apple cart.
Yes.
But the gala was significant, not just because you were helping out, but for another...
because I met my husband.
Indeed.
My husband-to-be, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
It was 1977, if you remember, it was the height of the IRA, really, over on the mainland. And so security was very, very heavy. And there were royal personages at most of the galas. And, of course, Her Royal Highness the Princess Alexandra came here because she'd laid the foundation stone. And so the local police were, of course, informed. And my husband tells me that whoever went in and said, you know, I want some volunteers, you, and you. And he looked at the cast list and saw that Angela Rippon was appearing and rather fancied her, so he volunteered. And I met him that night, yes. So it was very, very romantic, yes. A wonderful season for me, yeah.
So with the apple cart, and you were playing a very large role.
No.
Oh,
one of the best roles ever written, because I was playing someone called Orinthia, who was the king's mistress. And there's a very long scene at the beginning when the king talks to his cabinet. Wonderful actors like Nigel Stock and Paul Hardwick and Charlie Lloyd Pack. And they talk about Orinthia rather a lot. And then she has this blazingly exciting scene of 10 minutes in the middle, and then a third act that goes on without her. So it's the most wonderful part of the world.
There are so many photographs of that production with you in it. I was under the impression that you were actually in every scene.
Just the middle bit, which helped considerably, because as my husband was wooing me, he could come and talk to me during the third act. After I'd done my work for the evening, you see, yes. But it was lovely, and it sort of, that wasn't the first Shaw I'd played, but I adore playing Shaw. And it was a marvellous production.
You know, Shaw is the second most presented playwright in Chichester Festival.
Yes, that's good, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's quite, when you start to count it up. Chekhov, I think, is third, Shakespeare rightly first.
Yes.
When you first went out onto that extraordinary big stage, what did you feel about playing in that sort of space?
I was absolutely terrified. I'd spent the last 2 to 3 years in London on Shaftesbury Avenue in the Globe Theatre, which is now called the Gielgud. I'd done the Norman Conquest there for a year, and then Donkey's Years. And I'd never played in a thrust stage, and I was absolutely terrified. And I can remember Sheridan Morley wrote a notice and said, Miss Keith played Orinthia as though she had lost the last race at Goodwood. I worked with him some time later, and I said, Sherry, I could never make up my mind whether I was supposed to have been riding in it or betting on it. Then we transferred the play to the Phoenix in London, which was a Pross-Arch theatre. And I felt more at home. It's also very difficult to play Shaw on a thrust stage because Shaw is words, 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 and ones that you want all the audience to hear every single one of. And consequently, I found it an enormous challenge and felt more at home in it once I got to the Phoenix. However, since that time, I always say to young people, once you do feel at home on that stage, it's very, very freeing. It really is, and I adore playing on there now.
Is it freeing because there is always a sense of achievement about making the space work, or just because actually you are acting with every part of your body all of the time?
A mixture of both, really. You feel very free because you feel you can move anywhere, which you can't always in a Pross-Arch stage, because if I moved and stood there, I'd be in front of you from all of the audience. But in the stage here, I can go and stand there and know that at least a half or 2/3 of the audience. So you feel very free to move around as an actor. It is an enormous challenge because the old adage works, you can't hear what you can't see. And I know quite often people do tend to think they can't hear in the theatre.
Yes, and in the early years, certainly, a lot of the newspaper articles in the 60s, 62, 63, 64, commented on that. But it started to go away. People started to learn how to speak on the stage, it seems.
I challenge that.
Do you? They didn't write about it anymore.
No.
But going back to your beginnings, did you always know you wanted to be an actress?
Yes.
And if so, how did you make that happen? How did you get your first job?
Well, it was a very different world because when I was at school, the main question adults asked children, because they didn't really speak to each other as much as they do now, was what are you going to do when you grow up, or what are you going to do when you leave school? And there weren't the choices for girls then. And apparently my mother always told me that one night I said in the bath when I was 5, I'm going to be either an actress or a nun. And she said, nuns can't wear pretty clothes. And I said, I'll be an actress then. And I never changed. When I went to drama school when I left school, and I just started writing letters. It was a very, very different job because there were repertory theatres in almost every town in this land, which is extraordinary. I know Chichester didn't have one, but they were all over the place. So you had lots of places where you could go and learn your craft, which is what acting really is. And I started in a place called Chesterfield, which is the middle, with the one with the crooked spire. And it was fascinating because I was talking to someone recently about about it. And when I was there, 59 to 60, they were still surrounded by coal mines. And I can remember walking to the theatre from my digs and seeing the coal miners walking home with lamps on their heads. Extraordinary. And I'd been to Scotland because I had family up in Scotland, but I'd never been north of Watford. And it was quite a shock.
Yes. and was it, as everybody always talks about, that wonderful rep system where you did a play a week or 2 plays a week, so you got this extraordinary body of work behind you?
Absolutely. I often say to young actors now, what is extraordinary? I was talking to someone who's about 25, 26, and he'd done, I think, 2 or 3 things on the Fringe, and maybe 1 or 2 lines on television, and then whatever play I was in with him. And I said, gosh, by the time I was your age, I'd probably played about 50 different parts, 49 of which were probably absolutely lousy, but I'd actually been on a stage and done them. And there was the most amazing range of work, which I'm afraid young actors don't get anymore. Mm.
And so, and Patrick Garland, in that lovely comment he made about you being so funny, naturally, immediately funny, did you start to think, I'm a comic actress, or did you just never think of yourself in any other way than how will I inhabit this role?
Absolutely, the latter. Yes, I don't think of myself as a comic actress. I'm lucky enough to have played some of the great comedic roles, and I always quote. I forget. Garrick, I think, started saying it. Redgrave actually was one who said, you can fool the town with tragedy, but comedy will find you out, my son. And I always say, there's always this funny old phrase, the clown wanting to play comedy. I've been lucky enough and privileged enough to work with a lot of clowns, and by that I mean the great stand-up comedians. And I know all of them can play Hamlet, or could. It's the Hamlets that quite often can't touch the clowns.
So you were in Chesterfield. Where did you go after that? Did you just take a next job up the ladder?
Yes, I did. I went to fortnightly rep, which was a big step up the ladder. That meant a different play every fortnight, not every week. And that was at Lincoln. And then about 5 or 6 repertory companies, and then I got a job with the RSC, yes.
And did you have that in your mind?
No, I never had a career path. Of course, in those days, people wanted to work to be actors and actresses. They didn't want to be famous, which is what happens now. And, the whole culture is about instant something. One knew in one's bones, and because one had been around a whole load of people, that it took time. It takes time to learn your craft. And it's something you can only do when you're employed. Violinists, we have this wonderful violinist, and in the play.
He's amazing.
Oh, he's brilliant. And he can practice for, 8 hours. Pianists can, artists can, but actors, you can't practice unless you're doing it with other people, hopefully in front of an audience.
And when you arrived at the RSC, did it feel different? Was there this sort of aura about it?
It was 1963, and I was terribly excited because it was a great, great year. Peggy Ashcroft was leading the company, and there were the guest stars were people like Cyril Cusack and Kenneth Haig and Michael Craig, and the stalwarts were Ian Holm and Roy de Treese and lots of people. It was an amazing, amazing time.
And you were obviously one of the youngest in that company. And did you think, in 10 years' time I want to play Lady Macbeth?
No, I don't think I ever thought I wanted to play. Funnily enough, people have said to me, what do you want to do? And I never have. I'm always amazed when people want me to play a part and I read it and I think, they think I can do this. The only part I desperately wanted to play was Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream, and I auditioned for it and didn't get it, I remember. And that's the only part I desperately wanted to play.
So that's really interesting. So with the enormous body of knowledge you were building up in a really quite short period of time, it wasn't fueled by one day I'm going, like a lot of the chaps you talk to, they do have in that mind, one day I'm going to be that Lear, or
yes.
I'm going to,
Yes, I know. Well, chaps, actors have a set, line of classic parts, I think, really. They want to start off playing Hamlet. and end up playing Lear.
Yes.
Really, with maybe a Prospero in between, but you know. But there isn't that sort of way for ladies. I mean, strangely enough, over the past few years, I've done some of the great older classic lady roles. Lady Bracknell and Mrs. Malaprop, and now Lady Wishford, which is lovely. But I never thought, oh, I must play those roles.
Do you think that's because there isn't enough writing for older actresses, so therefore there isn't this obvious sort of narrative, if you like, in terms of being a younger actress moving through middle age?
Yes.
Do you think that's partly it, that there just aren't the roles? Or
Well, of course, the roles that the chaps see themselves playing are all classic roles that were written at a time when actresses weren't being written for. Well, there weren't any. So, no. And I don't see myself as a career. I mean, I'm jolly lucky to have kept working this long. That's what I think.
We're lucky to have you. So you were at the RSC, and then you were going to be filmed. How did you get that moment where you decided to take a job in television or not? Is it part of the same that you took the jobs you offered?
You took the jobs you were offered, and then it wasn't a question of either or. What you wanted to do was everything. Yeah. It's only now that people have been put into compartments. People join the RSC and maybe do years and years there, or get into a soap on television, or the National, or keep touring. Then, I mean, when I was in London, I remember when I was doing the Norman Conquests, I was rehearsing Good Life during the day and doing it on a Sunday. And then at one point, when I was doing Donkey's Ears and I was doing Good Life during the morning, someone phoned up and said, would I read a book for Woman's Hour, the Virginia Woolf Flush? And I said, yes, of course. Oh dear, I think I can do it in the afternoon. So there wasn't a question of, oh, I'll do either or. You just tried to do as much as possible, which is what gave actors of my generation and actresses the range, I think, that I don't think, sadly, younger actors have now, because they just don't have the possibility of doing that.
And the context, you know, the place at which certain pieces of theatre or certain roles fit in, you know, that they are part of something broader than just themselves.
Exactly.
I mean, when I was preparing for this, I must say, when I was looking at the things in the late 60s and the 70s that you were doing, I just thought you obviously have a twin in a cupboard, because it seemed an insane amount of work.
It was ridiculous, and that was another lovely reason for coming here, meeting my wonderful husband. I suddenly realised that there was life, which is terribly important.
Yes, moving slightly slower, possibly.
Moving slightly slower. Well, yes, but giving yourself time to breathe.
So once you'd made that decision, you'd come down here in 1977. There is then a gap. It's not that you're here for the next few seasons. So did you just, you know, again, the same thing?
Well, yes, I was doing other things. I did various things, and that was before Chichester took on touring productions, of which I've done a few here as well. I did various things in London. I did Millionaireess, Another Shore, Hobson's Choice, Captain Brassband, Another Shore, and, I forget what else. And then I was asked to come back and do, when John Gale took over, do Miranda, which Beverly Cross had written as a kind of hymn to Chichester. And that was huge fun. It got the most appalling notices and packed the theatre out for however long we did it. It was great fun.
Well, I mean, that 1987, it was very interesting in that period of time that all of the conflicts between the quality of the work versus the bums on seats debates were most virulent, it's clear. But many of the people talked to for the book actually want to say John Gale did a jolly good job. It's very interesting, you know, exactly that thing, that the theatre was full.
Theatre was full, yeah.
And Miranda sounded rather a wonderful romp.
Oh, it was a great romp. It was absolutely lovely. We had huge fun. Wendy Toy directed it. And lots of friends were in it. Murray Watson, Milton Johns, lots of people were in it who I have, you know, gone on to know for a long, long time. And it was huge fun, and people really enjoyed that play.
Did you feel in any way, because obviously you met your husband here, but also because you'd been on the stage 10 years before here, did it feel like going back to Chichester? It did. So it didn't feel just like another job.
No. It was very much coming back. to Chichester, and I think when I played Miranda was the first time that I felt the freedom doing Miranda here, you know.
And what do you think that is? Why is it that Chichester is under the skin of so many people? You say that it was only your second time back, but yes. It felt that. What is it about it?
Well, it is lovely. It's that thing I remember saying when I was interviewed by someone earlier on in the season, you know, it's that wonderful thing, you feel the audience actually want to be there. And that sounds rather strange, but quite often, certainly in London, you can quite often feel they don't.
Yeah.
You know, they haven't managed to get in to see The Lion King or something. But they book their dinner and their car park, so they must go somewhere. Or else, usually the wife has said, I'm sure you'll love it, and he sits there after 5 minutes and says, I always knew she was wrong, you know. And you can feel waves of that quite often. Also, it's this strange thing in London, well, it's not strange, it's a great cosmopolitan city now, that you'll get people from faraway places, okay, who understand the language, but they don't understand the culture. And that's the thing you get outside London, which you don't get in London anymore. You get people who know the culture and sort of can all appreciate it together. And when theatre is appreciated with, hopefully, 1,200 people in there, it's the most wonderful feeling.
Yes. Yes, and it's sort of the thing that I think many of us who feel that this theatre is our theatre have grown up learning about theatre because we were children here.
Yes.
You know, my mummy is sitting over there, and she bought me first when I was 6.
Yes.
It's that thing that you can see other people's faces enjoying it, and so you learn what you're missing as much as what you're getting.
Exactly.
In that sort of way.
Exactly.
Speaking of faces, did you find the burden of being suddenly so famous on the television? Well, was it a burden, or was it actually rather fun?
Well, it wasn't sudden, actually, funnily enough. I think probably sudden happens more these days because of the newspapers and things. But I had started doing a series a long time ago with a very famous actress called Phyllis Calvert, which was called Kate, for Yorkshire Television. And it was on every year for 3 years, and they were 13-hour-long episodes. So I had started getting that, oh, don't I know you thing in the street. And then Norman Conquests, I suppose, it only grew very gradually. People think it was a great big rip-roaring hit. It wasn't. People didn't really think it was as good as they think it was until about the 3rd series. So that was 3rd year in. So it was something that gradually happened. So it didn't really happen to me overnight.
No, well, it's that overnight success that takes 20 years.
Yes.
You know, that sort of thing. But having said that, I mean, the Good Life and the 4 of you, you were celebrity is something, it's a word that's used a lot now. And you were saying before, you know, in those old days it used to be the stars rather than celebrities. But you were suddenly not just actors.
No, we went into people's rooms.
Yes,
exactly.
It was a different sort of level of thing.
Yes.
Was that fun?
Yes, it was. But what it was, yes, of course it should. And what it was this wonderful freedom. When I first started in rep in Chesterfield, I can remember there was an actor. I thought he was elderly. He was probably about 45.
Actually, quite young.
Yes, exactly.
45.
Terribly young. But I remember him saying to me, it was, I think, ITV came in 56, didn't it? And I think in Chesterfield you used to play to about 3 men and a dog, you know. And I remember him saying, oh, it's television. You know, by the time you get to my age, there'll be no theatre at all. Absolutely none. Television will take it all away. And the funny thing I found, when I did things like The Good Life, people would go to the theatre now to see people they'd seen on the television. So one fed the other, which is marvellous.
And do so, I mean, in the West End in particular, that an awful lot of the new audiences for straight plays have come because they're seeing people they've seen
on the television. And my very first play in the West End, which was a play called Suddenly at Home, Francis Durbridge with Gerald Harper, I remember a friend of mine saying, Jerry's above the title. And I said, yes. And they said, but he's television. It's a bit funny, the snobism that there was. There's always been awful snobism in my business anyway. But I mean, I can remember that vividly. But one does feed off the other, which is terrific.
And when you speak, because I know you're very generous to younger actors and actresses, a lot of people have said that you always take the time to answer questions and pass on that knowledge, if you like.
Well, that's the only way they're going to learn. You don't learn it sitting in a drama school, being taught by teachers. You know, you've got to learn the history. I'm terribly keen, sorry to digress slightly, but I feel that we don't look after our history enough. Yes. And I remember being terribly shocked speaking to some youngsters, and I was in a production when I did Importance, and I said our producer was coming down when we opened at Bath, and I said, it's Michael Codron, do you know who that is? And these young actors didn't know who that was. Now, Michael Codron has probably been the most influential producer of the 20th century. He discovered all the writers that we now laud and praise today, i.e. Stoppard and Ayckbourn and Frayne and Hampton and, you know, all this. And I was so shocked that they didn't know. So I can be rather boring about people knowing about the history.
But I mean, it is incredibly important because it's, apart from anything else, it's the sense of the people behind the ones you see, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's that. But what I was particularly thinking as well is that you were at many points, because you are clearly such a hard worker, which is, I think, one of the reasons that everybody in the book admires you so much. It's not just what you've done, it's actually the graft of it. But the difference between acting well for television and acting well on the stage is huge, isn't it? So how did you manage to switch backwards and forwards in those
isn't
times?
it difficult? Well, there's no real difference in as much as acting, I believe, is based on truth. Now, truth isn't reality. I remember someone saying to me once, a young actress, when I suggested that she do something, and I said, and she said, oh, I'm going for reality. And I will go to my grave wishing that I'd said, what is real about standing on a platform 8 times a week, doing exactly the same thing and saying the same thing? There's nothing real about it, but it's the truth of the moment, and the truth of the lady, in my case, who you are playing. What would she do? So that is the same on television or in the theatre. In the theatre, you have to project those thoughts, both physically and mainly vocally, to the people at the back. Yes. So I think it was Dirk Bogarde who said the difference between working on the stage and in front of a camera is that the camera can see you think. And of course, in the theatre, you can't see someone think. It's difficult to explain.
But when you're, do you like one better than the other? You know, that sense that every performance in the theatre is unique because it's happening then and it's live. Whereas, of course, the retaking and the refilming in television and film.
Well, I used to always say, when people say to me, which do I prefer? And I should say, well, usually the one I'm not doing.
Yes.
You know, when you come to the end of a week in the theatre and you've done your 8 performances and you're tired, you think, oh, if only I was doing this on television or film, I'd only have to do it once. And then if you do something on television and it's over and you think, oh, if only I could do it again. So I'm very lucky to have had the best of both worlds. I think now when I see television, not only when I hear about it, if anyone asks me what I would really like to do it's theatre, because television has changed so enormously. People don't get rehearsed anymore. No. They're thrown into their frocks and off they go.
Yes, and they often, and the thing that seems so bizarre to me, particularly that you're often playing a love scene with someone you've not even met.
Yes, you know, a friend of mine had to be in bed with someone and said, oh, by the way, hello, I'm Michael Sills.
I don't know, and that seems quite a good way of doing it.
Well, I suppose so, yes.
That's another story altogether.
Yeah, another story.
You were back here as wonderful Mistress Ford.
Yes, that was
in Merry Wives of
that was
1990.
huge fun. That was lovely.
You do look, all of you in those pictures, you, Phyllida Law, Bill Maynard, you look like you are having a lark from start to finish. Every one of those photographs looks a happy one. Was that one of those happy companies?
Oh, terribly happy. Yes, it was. It was great fun. I'd worked with Michael Rudman. He directed Donkey's Years, and when he asked me to do it, I thought, what fun. And it was a romp, and of course worked wonderfully on that thrust stage again, you see. Yeah.
And then, of course, Monsieur
Amilcar, which we did, Keith and I did here.
Yes. And you were Eleanor.
Yes, I was.
Now, you played quite a lot opposite Keith, it seems.
Well, I did that, and this year, yes. And then, of course, when we were here in 1977, there wasn't this place. There wasn't even a tent. And the young wanted, I say the young because the people who were playing lesser parts in the company wanted to work on plays. And so Keith and I used to go around doing a kind of two-man thing called the Two Keiths, doing readings and things to raise money for the tent, which they got the following year. So yes, I did Monsieur Amilcar in here with Keith. He was the most appalling giggler. Oh, he used to make me laugh so much. And of course with lovely Jean Kent playing my mother. And some of you might know who that was. I had a card from her. She was 90 the other day. I sent her a card, bless her. Yes.
And of course then, I mean, nobody who is local, and you are local by adoption, won't know about the fact that the theatre then went into a very difficult period of time in sort of the late 90s and early 2000s. And you came back in 1996 for Entertaining Angels, which was an extraordinary play. Now, I did say I was going to read something out that you will probably blush at, but it is seen as incredibly important. I don't know if you are aware of quite how important Jonathan Church and Alan Finch think your decision to come back here in 2006 was to the health of the theatre. And Jonathan said, Penny coming back here, it was one of those acts of goodwill. Her decision at the last moment to do the play signalled a turnaround. It was the sense of doing it here as part of helping the theatre that she loves. That single decision and that single act of commitment from her meant that we had the right play to open the season and the theatre could survive.
That's very nice. Thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant. No, I mean, I think that's why I was going to do it, but I thought it was a really important thing to say because in the end, the only reason that there is a theatre is because people like you and all of the creative people, the producers, the directors, the designers, the voice coaches, the composers, everybody makes that act of goodwill to a place and to the idea that theatre matters and that a particular theatre matters.
Yes.
Now, when you made that decision, were you making a decision that you knew had ripples more than just doing a play in the way that Jonathan Church and the team felt you had made that decision?
Well, one or two people said to me, there's no audience there anymore. And then someone else said, and are you starting the season? Oh, that's death. So I said, I think if I'd been really witty, I'd have said, well, I'm playing a widow anyway, wouldn't I? But I didn't. I should have said that. But I liked the play, and I thought, well, why not, really?
And it's the relationship between you and your leading man, who actually is dead, Benjamin Whitrow, your husband, it was a beautiful piece of theatre.
It was the most beautiful scene. I think it's one of the most beautiful scenes I've ever played. And I've never had such a response with letters from people, from a lot of widows and a lot of clergy widows, which is very interesting.
Because it's brutal, isn't it?
Oh,
yes.
I think dreadful. But, they lose their husband, they lose their raison d'être and their home all in one fell swoop. I mean, the only other people that happens to is female members of the aristocracy, isn't it?
They get sort of sent off.
Sent off, that's it, yes.
But when you were doing the play, could you feel the sense that, you made that very interesting comment about London audiences don't always want to be there. When you opened Entertaining Angels in 2006, did you feel the sense from an audience, obviously a bigger audience than in the small house, but that they desperately wanted it to work?
Yes, is that what it felt like? I certainly did, yes. And the goodwill was wonderful. And it was such a happy, jolly company. It was just a marvellous time.
And could you feel it turning, that actually the theatre was on the up again? Or not
Well,
quite?
no, because I hadn't seen it so much when it hadn't been.
Right.
You'd
been away from
I'd been away from it. I'd heard things, and as I said, I was warned by various kindly souls. No, I wouldn't say that I felt it turning. I just knew it was evidently a play that people loved, and lots of people came.
And I mentioned Ben Whitrow as your leading man, and he had quite a long tradition with Chichester as well. Not least of all, one of my favourites, Terra Nova, which he played Amundsen. Yes. And it was exactly one of those things when I came back here and I went around talking to everybody about Terra Nova, what a best play ever. And someone said, you do know that it was one of the worst box offices of any play that had ever been done. And again, it was that the thing that you remember as a member of the audience when you love a play is your experience of it.
Yes, of course, absolutely. It doesn't matter.
Whether played to 40%,
No.
you don't actually care, do you?
No.
So I just did want to ask a little bit. You've had some jolly dishy leading men's and leading men's. That was
Even lots of leading men.
Lots of
leading men.
Yes, I'm now going into pidgin English.
Yes, I like it.
It's
I
fantastic.
like it. It's good.
I am a writer, you know. Extraordinarily worrying that. But it's invidious to ask you to have favourites.
Yes.
But presumably, you'd have said something about Keith Mosse always giggling. There must be some leading men that you particularly like to play across. So does that ever play a decision when you're going to take a part, if you know it's going to be X opposite you?
No. The thing that decides me to do a play is the writing. This came home to me and fixed itself in my mind. During Jubilee year, one of the shows I did at the Palladium was with a wonderful dancer called Christopher Gable. I don't even remember, he decided to be an actor, and he played Delius Amanuensis in the Ken Russell film, whose name escapes me.
Audience members' participation? Roger?
No, not the boyfriend. He was in that too, but he played... Anyhow, Chris... Exactly, thank you so much. Thank you so much. But I remember being with him. It was Paul Eddington, June Whitfield, Chris Gable and me singing There Are Bad Times Just Round the Corner. So I've sang on the London Palladium stage, which is good. Anyhow, and I remember saying to Chris, I said, oh, Chris, don't you miss all that dancing, all that wonderful, beautiful? He said, oh, no, lifting all those heavy girls on my shoulder. Agony. Having to dance, having to do class. No, it's wonderful to be able to go and speak. He said, the only thing I miss is the music. He said, going into a theatre and hearing that music, that orchestra, nightly, because he was lead dancer at Covent Garden. And I remember thinking then, what would I miss? And it's the language, and that's what always attracts me, is the way different people say different things. Right. So if I'm sent a script, the thing that I look for most is not whether it's like me, whether I want to be like it, who I'll be with, is what is the writing like.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's the thing that attracts me. So I'm lucky enough to have played with lots of lovely people. My last leading man before, I haven't got a leading man in this, no.
Part of the plot,
yes, exactly. Was Peter Bowles, who came actually last matinee. And of course, Peter, some of the younger actors said to me, he is very tall, isn't he? I said, yes, he's the only leading actor I've played with who was in fact taller than I am. So, but no, I've been very lucky. They've been marvellous, Ben and Paul Eddington, of course, and Richard Briers, and lots of people are very lucky.
And that brings us, as almost as if this interview was planned, back to this Jubilee year.
Yes.
And the way of the world.
Yes.
And of course, it's a wonderful play, one that many people adore, but a lot of people who've never heard it for the first time find the language
and if you have to learn it, it's very sticky.
And of course, it's part of this season because it was done here in 1984.
Yeah.
Now, having even just spent this time with you, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, of course, when it was done here in 1984, Joan Plowright, Maggie Smith, you are part of that generation of grand dame of the theatre. Did you in any way think, do I want to go back to Chichester to do that role because the last time it was done was Joan Plowright, or did you think, I'll show up? What did you think? Or did
Neither of those things. I read it, and it took me more time to read the notes on the original text, because some of the allusions are so, it's 300 years ago now, so arcane. I had to keep going back to the notes. And
you hadn't played it before?
No, I hadn't. I'd seen it a long, long time ago. John Clements, God bless him, because of course he was second director here, and he never gets enough acclaim, John Clements.
Don't worry, he
Good.
gets loads.
Good.
Loads of pictures.
Because he was a great man of the theatre.
But he's smoking in every picture.
Oh, well, there you go. Anyhow, but he and his lady wife, Kay Hammond, I'm sure you'll remember, Glorious, they did a season of restoration plays at the Savile Theatre, which of course no longer exists, which is the one at the end of Shaftesbury Avenue. And I remember seeing it. I saw the rivals there, I saw Beau Stratton, and they also did Way of the World with Margaret Rutherford. Right. And I have a vague recollection of her in a really frizzy white wig with this great mob cap sitting in front of a mirror, So, no, I never think, gosh, oh no, I'll show them. No.
No, you just do it.
Yes, I do it, yes.
Because that was a question I had before we'd talked, and now we've talked. I knew you wouldn't feel that.
No.
I found it when I was watching. I loved the production across the way, but I found your portrayal so painful in many moments, because she's so, actually Lady Wishford is really lovely, and I thought it was rather awful. A lot of the time you look so sad and so gullible, and quite painful.
Well, yes,
portrayal.
I think she is rather. She's one of the nicest, sweetest, stupidest women I've ever played in my life. You know, she just believes everything the last person tells her. And it's there in the text. She really does. There she is thinking her daughter's been a whore, and the daughter says, no, I'm not guilty. She's been told by her best friend that she's a wicked, wicked woman. The daughter says, no, I'm not, and, you know, you prove it. And immediately she believes the daughter. So she does go like a windmill. And I think it's right that you should feel... I think it is terribly sad. It's the same as I've said in rehearsal, the last scene in Twelfth Night with Malvolio in his little cage. I think it's terribly cruel.
Yes,
really.
because actually the only crime, as it were, is being gullible.
There's
no
exactly.
malice
No,
there.
No, there isn't malice. There's malice in most of the other characters. Yes, but she's the only person who, as I said, has no malice at all. She's just a bit silly.
And watching it, and I was, you know, obviously you've mentioned 8 shows a week, and of course that, you know, it's the traditional amount of work that an actor does. How do you keep a role such as that fresh? How do you come on every performance and play it for those people who are coming once and they haven't seen it before? But how do you not get bored?
Oh no, you can never get bored. You can never get bored in the theatre. You might be tired, but you can never ever get bored, because anything might happen.
Yeah.
Literally. You know,
particularly with all those wigs, I imagine.
With all those wigs, yes. What's happened to me? I got my foot caught in my petticoat and thought I'm going to fall over. My fan got wound round the chaise the other night, and I thought, I can't get off the stage. Anything can happen, so you can't get bored. I suppose it's years and years of training and years of doing it. It's like being an athlete. I know when I stop, I've had a cold brewing. When I stop on Sunday, there it'll be. Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you still feel nervous, or did you ever feel nervous?
Yes, oh yes. Not so much nervous as apprehensive. I suppose.
Every night, or just at the opening of a show?
No, not every night. I think early on, before you've presented it to an audience, you do. But not the shaking nerves that you can get. And if you've done enough work and prepared and are aware that things can go wrong, no. But apprehensive, I'd say, yes.
You probably won't remember saying this, but when you were being interviewed for the CFT book, you told a lovely story about Keith Mosse, who often forgot words and would sing or just ramble on until he got
the
back
rhythm.
to them.
Yes, absolutely. It was marvellous.
And do you feel, in those sorts of circumstances, do you feel a responsibility to help somebody get back on track?
Oh yes, yes. And you just hope other people will do the same for you.
And this, I admit, is possibly a writer asking an actress. Do you read reviews? If so, at what stage? I mean, I never read reviews of my novels when they come out. I only read them maybe 6 months later when my skin is a little thicker.
Yes, I don't read reviews. No. My husband does, but I
don't.
I don't, no.
No. Because you feel that they would be raw, or they'd change your performance?
No, because when they're awful...
You remember every word.
You remember every word, and you've got to go on that night. And you feel a deep sense of shame. And if they're good, they can be as destructive. You can think, oh, this is the good bit coming out. They like the way I picked up my glass, which of course is disaster.
Yes, then you drop the glass.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, no, I don't do that.
No, absolutely. I mean, because it's obviously very different as a writer, because you never see somebody responding to your work when you're doing it.
In the same way as I do.
I mean, it could be 3 years later, so it's not destructive, although often they are spiteful, so you don't want to hit it. So I don't really want to know either. But
I think now probably I don't read that much about other people. Occasionally I do, and I think a lot of them are terribly spiteful, or very, very gushing. And I remember when I was doing Hobson's Choice, and friends of mine were over from the States, and they said, oh, we're come to see it. The reviews are wonderful, we can't wait. And I remember, and I said, well, it's not that good, you know, please, because the expectation was so high. And I suddenly realised that nothing's ever really that good, but nothing's ever really that bad. Maybe one or two, but not really, you know. And it's one person's opinion. The trouble is now, because theatre is now so expensive, certainly in London, people want a guide. So we're going a bit of the way of Broadway, I'm afraid.
Yes, and shows come off faster than they did, didn't they?
Than they used to, yes.
Exactly. Now I'm going to throw it open to the audience, because I know that some of you will have questions you do want to ask. But while you're preparing for your moment to address CFT royalty, just one last question. Do you have something that you're burning to do that you haven't yet done? You don't want to write a play? Or...
Oh no, I can't write. You can't even write a postcard. It's shaming to say this to an author. But no, and I always think that's not... I look on that as a good thing, in as much as if I was burning to do something, I think I'd have such strong ideas of why I wanted to do it and the way I wanted to do it. When I got into rehearsal, I probably wouldn't be open to the suggestions of the director or indeed the other actors. Because unless you're doing a one-man show, it's very much a marriage, it's a communal effort.
So that sounds rather a wonderful position to be in, that you will be excited by the next thing when it comes.
When it comes.
But there isn't this burden of expectation or anticipation that can sometimes mean something's no fun. Because it does seem to me that you still
I get enormous fun. I don't see now, I'm lucky enough, I'm old enough, I've been at it long enough, and I've got a nice husband looking after me. So I don't have to work, which is a great privilege. Mark, you at my age, I should be retired really. But
I can't see that.
I can't see any reason for doing it other than it being fun now.
Yes. And so you will quite happily not
potter
work.
on.
Yes, potter on and then do something else.
Yes.
How wonderful.
Yes.
I think you've earned that though.
Oh, good.
Good. Right. Are there any questions anybody would like to ask? If so, put your hand up. Lady there, thank you.
I know that when I go and see something you're in, you know, I can rely, and I think probably most of us feel the same, on it being very entertaining. And one of the things I find about you, Penny, is that there's always tiny little things you do that somehow make the character that you're playing ring true. And, you know, just to give you, Entertaining Angels was so wonderful, so many of them. I was just thinking before I asked the question what I'd choose from that. But it'd probably be easier to choose something from The Way of the World. And in The Way of the World, there's a little moment when you say, you're looking down at your feet and you say, but which foot should I choose? And what I want to know is those little things that for me define you and the way you act. I wondered how much of those are directed and how much you bring to those roles, because it's very specifically you, those tiny little things that just sort of glitter and make you. So I want to know, is that you, or are you just getting the same directors who...
No, I wouldn't say it's directors. I think it's me. It's this... One always tries to find, as I said before, the truth of the lady. And this one, Lady Wishford, is so obsessed with how she looks. I suppose when that happened, and I always think it's exciting to see something happen all of a sudden, suddenly a change in mind. I remember, and I often quote this actually, actors will say, I don't think my character would do that, you know, and would think long and hard about it. And I was in a car with my husband, and in the back of the car was Michael Rudman, who directed The Merry Wives of Windsor. And we were travelling along Pall Mall, and he leaned out of the back window and he said, "Hi, Geoffrey." Now, Geoffrey Archer was standing, they'd worked together. "Hi, Geoffrey." And Geoffrey Archer turned literally on a sixpence and said, "Michael, lunch Tuesday?" And that was the most amazing lesson to me as an actress. I just thought so often we will spend hours in rehearsal thinking how a thought comes, and we very rarely think as actors and actresses, that in actual fact thoughts can come out of the air, and that's terribly exciting. I think I learnt a lot of that from Peter Barkworth, with whom I worked for a year on Donkey's Years, and he was very much that sort of actor. The detail, and that's the interesting thing, I think, about the women. But thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. It's a lovely question. Another question. It's awfully bright. I can't actually... Gentleman there.
You said that television these days is almost no time for rehearsal. Can you just say how much time do you have to rehearse Way of the World?
We had 5 weeks, which was marvellous, because it was such difficult language. And a lot of it had to be cut. I don't know how long the first production lasted. I know Rivals, which is about the same time, when Sheridan first wrote that was over 4 hours. And I don't think people would take that anymore. And there were a lot of the allusions had to be sort of, well, cut and pasted and slightly brought up to date. So it was a long time, and also you normally wouldn't get that long. On a new play, you'd normally get 4 weeks. But this one we had 5. A lot of characters, of course. So it was good to have that on. No, we were 4 weeks in London and then a week down here, working in the rehearsal room.
Did you have a voice coach particularly to speak the verse in that particular way?
No, there was a voice coach to help with the accents for the servants.
Right.
That was it mainly.
Yes, because there's nothing so off-putting as a slippery accent that comes and goes.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Oh, lovely.
Yes.
Gentleman there.
Despite the 5 weeks of rehearsal you have, when you reach Chichester and you're in front of an audience for the first time, are there still many changes made during the preview period? Maybe because of the reaction of your audience?
Yes. I mean, there's always, especially with a comedy, that is the missing element when you are rehearsing. So I think we did have 1 or 2 changes, not necessarily in the dialogue, but in the way one scene moved on from another. Because, of course, initially there are 5 acts, and each one has different scene changes that go on forever. But so just a bit, and I think there were a few snips too, really, once we saw it had got longer. So but that first week we were here most of the days, rehearsing as well.
Is it an element also in something like that some of the jokes somehow just are not working orally for an audience and they have to be beefed up visually?
Well, not necessarily. It's terribly difficult, and that's only something you learn with experience. I remember I had a line in Entertaining Angels, and Ben Whitrow had to say to me, where he was supposed to be dead, come back as a ghost, and he asked me what I'd been doing, and I'd say, wandering about. And Ben had to say, Moses wandered for 40 years in the wilderness, to which my reply was, that's because he was a man. And the rest of the line was, and he wouldn't stop and ask directions, which never really, never got it. And I can remember someone came, my godson came and said, I couldn't understand what you said, Penny, after he was a man. And I realised it was as technical as not hitting the man, but going on to directions. So in other words, when he said, Moses wandered for 40 years, and I said, yes, that's because he was a man and wouldn't stop and ask directions. I didn't swallow the man, but I knew that the laugh was at the end, the big one, on directions. So that's the sort of thing you learn with an audience, so certainly vocally. But this is such tricky language that some of it is really very arcane.
Yes. But I think, in a funny sort of way, I could see there were different reactions in the audience the night I came, the press night, in that there were some people who obviously had listened to more classic verse and were listening like as if it was music, rather than trying to capture every word. And there are others who were sort of really thinking very strongly about each word, and that's a harder thing to do, isn't it?
Well, also, it's the same as Shakespeare. When you go to a Shakespeare play, the first quarter of an hour, you have to get your ear attuned, don't you?
I find that with Americans, actually. I'm not Americans in general terms, obviously, I don't wish to...
With American
yes,
plays.
with American plays
yes.
and things, that
yes.
you have to get into it before you can hear it.
Well, it's the same with any play. I always get terribly worried if people laugh too much early on, because our great comedies are about situation. Sad sitcom has become a pejorative term, because all the great comedies are the situation that you laugh at. So you must understand the situation first before you start laughing.
You start your laughing. We've got time for one more question, or possibly two. Lady there and lady there.
I was just wondering how you find this as an acting space to perform in, because I've seen you here before.
It's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. It's very different. I did Amilcar here, and I did the Ratcombe thing last year, which was fun. It's super. It's just a marvellous, marvellous space. You feel really in contact with everybody. Yeah.
Thank you. Lady there.
You were saying about the older plays having to read all the notes and everything too. But they're mainly written by academics who haven't done any acting. So do you ever find after you've done all the rehearsals and done the performances, you feel you've got an insight that the academics who wrote all the notes don't have?
Gosh, that's a tricky question. I suppose the thing is what one finds out as an actor, an actress, that one understands more of what life was like. I can only equate it to when I was at school, history was all wars and kings and queens and dates. And I'd love to have known what they had for breakfast. And so, as an actress, you can read all those notes and find out all the allusions. But I know that Lady Wishford couldn't have got dressed on her own, because if you have a corset like mine to do up, you have to have a maid, you know. And that's the sort of thing you find out, which is fascinating. And how many wigs she must have had and all those things.
Which is beautiful. You have done my job for me.
Oh.
Obviously, I would love to sit here and keep asking you questions all evening, and so would everybody else. But I know your costume is complicated, and your wig mistress will be calling.
Yes.
So it just remains for me to say that there is a post-performance talk, where they're all called afterwards, the ones that happen after the performance, on Friday, this Friday, Friday the 4th, and you just stay in after the show is finished. I don't know who will be on that, but they're always very enjoyable, and they're very...
I think our designer.
The designer is going to be there. You know, they're very
clothes.
vivid when you've just seen it, absolutely. I will be back interviewing Philip Franks, the director of the new play, Marvellous Year for Plums, at 5:45. They're all slightly different times, depending on the length of the shows that's in before, on Tuesday, the 15th of May, for another pre-performance talk. But it just remains for me, I think, firstly, we have something for you to say thank you.
How lovely. That's really kind of you. Thanks.
Thank you. But I think I've done the thing that Penny Keith has just explained, how not to do the ending of a line, and I have just fallen into the trap by calling the flowers on. The applause has already happened. And of course, what I was going to say is, it's been an enormous honour to talk to you. You are CFT royalty. You are a very important part of Chichester, both in historical terms, that also sounds rather rude, but also for the fact that we have the wonderful opening of the season in The Way of the World Across the Way. I know all of you will either be seeing it or will have seen it, but I didn't anticipate quite how lovely you also were, and it's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Ladies
and gentlemen, Penelope Keith.
Thank you very much.